One of the compelling reasons of moving to the cloud, I believe, is the feature that preceded this one, the app service plan, and then the ability to run app services. They are the component in which your application is going to be deployed into. My name is Bob Tickleman. I'm excited to be your guide and introducing what is the app services for the platform as a service offering inside of Azure. Let's get into this. In another recording, we've talked about the different types of compute options that are available, from the traditional deployment of infrastructure as a service, where you are deploying virtual machines. The modern way, especially which applications are being written as containerized small micro services, we want to think of a different way of the operating system itself. I don't need entire operating systems to run. So these platform as a services and containers, and specifically app service plans, provide this backwards compatibility to existing environments, Windows and Linux operating systems, without having to manage and own the entire operating system to run a microserviced application. Now, yes, you could put lots of applications on, or microserviced applications on that operating system, but you're still managing an operating system that has patches and costs and licenses that go along with this. I really believe that this is a model that organizations should be looking at for running, especially their microserviced environment. We saw what the App Service Plan does as a resource allocation. We're now going to look at the runtime environments that you could then use inside of the resource allocations, the App Service Plans, to then deploy your applications. We're going to look at the different app services and the characteristics that they can take advantage of through the App Service Plan. You'll see a very similar configuration to what we're talking about here in that traditional Windows and Linux operating system environments, whether it be Apache or through IIS. That follows along the container models that had, containers that had pods, that had nodes, that had pools. That kind of hierarchical structure is going to be the same here, that we have app service plans that have app services that run on operating systems underneath them. And so we're going to see that the app services on that first line cover a wide range of types of applications. We've got mobile apps, we've got function apps, we've got logic apps, we've got web apps. So the type of apps, and I'll be doing this in the demonstration, have specific characteristics that come along with them. You'll see that things like identity is built into the app service itself. You don't have to program it. You can use the libraries to call the services. There's a limited amount of storage that's available in all of them as well. Now, it should be noted that the services that come with memory are volatile memory. It's non-durable, and you would need to find some way to attach durable storage to this. And we've covered that in other modules where we covered storage in general, whether it be through blob storage or through file shares. And so this is going to be that platform as a service, providing all of the current versions of apps environments that you're looking at, all the major ones. Now, I want to stress something because it gets confused with some of our customers, that they say, oh, Bob, I'm running on an older version of ASP.NET or maybe an older version of PHP, and you only have the current versions that are supported. I'd encourage you to investigate that just because we run the current version doesn't mean that your application won't run. I've had customers in the past that was, oh, I got a Windows Server 2003. I'm going like, that's like a 20-year-old operating system. And yes, it's air-gapped and they haven't patched it in decades. And I'm going, why? He goes, oh, well, we needed ASP.NET 1. I'm going, we can get around that much easier than trying to keep this Windows Server 2003 box. So just because the ASP.NET version or the PHP version isn't one that your application runs on, it doesn't mean that the application can't run. So I'd encourage you to look at the methods to be able to just test it and see what was deprecated from that major breaking change, is what we call it. And did it break your application? Because if you weren't using that call, it potentially may not impact your application. So it's kind of a side note that just because we support only the current versions doesn't mean that your current version or your old version app won't run. Another question I often get asked about this is, well, you're going to upgrade, and what happens if you deprecate that? First and foremost, you'll be known many months or years in advance of when we are going to deprecate an old supported version of a runtime, to give yourself times to do that evaluation and or make the modifications to come up to a current code. And so more and more applications are being written that way. So I just wanted to dispel that conversation. But the app service is the compartment in which your app is going to run that is then contained in the app service plan. I did part of this in a previous recording. I'll be doing this live, that in the app service, you're going to come in and you're going to give your app service a name, and it has to be globally unique. Now, this graphical interface is an old one. It's changed from what we're going to be currently working with, so don't get them confused. But you have the choice to be able to run code, and then we take a look at that runtime stack, and that's where you're going to get the major versions of .NET, ASP.NET, PHP that you'll see that's available for you to work with. As I said, it's a regionally based resource to be deployed, and that app service name that you're working with, because it's going to be appended to a publicly available URL, you're going to have a web app name that is globally unique. Yes, you can use CNAME if you're familiar with DNS. You can use a CNAME to take whatever this name is to equal something that is very easily recognizable by your organization. So all of them are available. And in a previous recording, we took a look at the app service plans in which this exists in. One of the services that is available in the app service plan, because remember, not all plans have all the services, and so in the premium and standard versions, we had these things called deployment slots. And if you saw that recording, they are actually referred to in the graphical interface as staging slots, but everybody refers to them as deployment slots. You'll see the free, shared, and basic have 0. And starting at the standard, we get 5. And for the premiums, we get 20. I'm not going to get into the reasons of why the difference, but when you take a look at what are called environments, you typically have dev, test, QA, staging, and production. Well, guess what? That's 5. And with microservices and modern application development, testing has been broken up into several different types of testing. So rarely do we ever consider it just one environment, because not all applications have to be tested the same way. So having multiples, and so why you have some of these different deployment slot patterns will make a difference for you. Now, there's some cool features that allows this to happen. What you now did, if you were trying to move code through this environment stage, if you were to take, say, V21, which was in test, and you wanted to deploy it into QA, which had V20 in it, you would have to uninstall V20. You would have to install V21, test it. If it didn't work, you'd have to uninstall V21 or the rollback and reinstall V20. That can significantly impact time and outages to your application. We're going to show you a feature called deployment slots that can be swapped, where you're actually going to literally swap the slots. The code can be pre-running and warmed up. You swap it over. If it tests well, you just leave it there. Otherwise, you can just swap it back. I'll be doing some of that in the live demo. Depending on the app service plan will depend on the number of deployment slots, whether you have them at all or how many that you're working with. But you can continue to add slots up until the maximum number that are supported by the plan. And if you need more, you're going to have to upgrade that plan. There's a whole bunch of features that will come along with the deployment slots. One of the neat things about them as well is you can have environmental variables and connection strings, so that as you're swapping through, there are things that must change, that can change, and must not, those 3 characteristics. So for example, as you're moving from, say, a deployment slot that is dev, that might have a connection string to a dev database, as you swap it into staging or production or one of the other stages, you'd want that information to change, because it no longer wants to be connected back to the dev database. I want it to now connect to a new connection string for the database in that appropriate area. Maybe there's credentials that need to come along with that. All of that stuff, we have this automation to provide for the management and the modern way applications, and especially CI/CD. We integrate very, very well with the CI/CD pipeline to use these deployment slots to manage environmental variables, connection strings that you're working with, identities. All of that is going to be available for you. I mentioned that there's a number of underlying services that come with them, and one of them is an identity provider. In addition to being integrated with Microsoft Entra ID, we have a wide variety of third-party providers. Very similar, if you go back and take a look at the identity module or modules that we talked about, Entra, we have that capability of working with an authentication process. So now that your application can have its own identity, it can be authenticated against these providers, and or the users using that application in that environment could use those identities. All of this has been mentioned, using TCP/IP. We're going to potentially want to have domain names that you're working with it. We saw that in the app service itself. It had to follow a name structure that was globally unique that appended to the Azure naming structure that you then could also use for a CNAME, but I want to embed that directly in the application. And so we do have the ability to create custom domain names in the app service. You saw that in the plan itself gave you different options for backing up. Now, I stressed at the time, it does not replace your need to be able to do your own backups. And we do recommend that you do follow a backup strategy that is based around your organization's process. There is built-in backup capabilities that will happen at a regular basis, and you'll see some of the limitations. I think one of them is backup to 10 gigabytes of app data. Now remember, the app data itself, there's some that's going to be in the volatile memory of the app. There's going to be some that might be connected to a durable storage like a file share or a blob storage. So that's going to be durable anyway, and you want to back up there. But we have backup capabilities built into the app service itself that you could work with in addition to your own backup program. So let's go take a look at the app service plan. I'm also going to add in the piece about scaling that was talked about in a previous module. As I've said in several of these presentations that there's several different ways to do this. Instead of doing them all and taking up some time, I'm going to spend the time going through just one way, and I'm going to start off with the app service plan itself. Remember, the app service plan is a parent container object that could have one or more app services inside of the app service plan. So here I'm in the app service plan. This is where I could scale my plan up and down, which is going to allow me to change the plan to get more resources or less, or more features. Remember that there are those two feature capabilities: hardware, how much memory and CPU is going to be allocated to it, and then what features we have from staging slots. And as I said, we're going to see them deployment slots everywhere else. That's the scaling up or down. And the scaling in and out features is where you're going to be able to create more instances of that app service plan. I'm going to get in and take a look, and there's the scaling. I could manually scale it if the plan supports it, which mine does, or I can turn into automatic or rules-based. I just want to take a few minutes here to cover a topic that I talked about in another recording on what is scaling. And this also applies to the scaling patterns that we have for virtual machines. So I'm going to get into a rules-based environment. I want to configure the rules-based. You've probably seen this in several of the slides that we had. Do I want to manually scale or get into a custom scaling rule? As I talked about, this is the overall rule, and I can have multiple scaling conditions. So here's a custom auto scale. And then these become the conditions. You can see down here, add a scaling condition. I'm going to call this condition 1 metric. I'm going to create another rule. Now this is an idiosyncrasy of the interface. So I'm in profile number 1. We've got condition number 1 here. I'm going to come in and click on this, but look where it puts me. It puts me back in the previous one. So this is one of my little pet peeves. I'm going to call this condition number 2. And I call this D of the week. And I create another one. And I click on it. It says profile number 1. Guess where it's going to put me? Back in condition number 1. I got to scroll down. And I call this day of year. So each one of these scaling conditions can be scaled on a metric that will have the rules to scale out and scale in. So this is where we're going to be able to pick what the metric is that I'm working with. Storage queues, service bus. And so these become the large grouping, and then I can take a look at the actual metric that we're working with. So I'm taking a look at current resources, and you can see there's quite a few metrics that we can then base our decision around. I'm going to come into the conditional operators. So in here we have all the grade 10 math stuff of greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, not equal to. So I'm going to say greater than or equal to, in this case 70%. I did in another demonstration or whiteboard where I talked about what is the time duration. That's that walking window. By default it's 10 minutes with a 1 minute time grain. on an average, so in my demonstration or whiteboard, I talked about, from 9:25, 9:26, 27, 28, 29 to 9:35 for that 10-minute window. It's an average. What is the operation? I want to increase the count by 1, and there's that term we talked about, cooldown. Again, I'm not going to get into these. If you go watch the recordings, there'll be other pieces that will fill in these ideas. So there's my scale out rule. I'm now going to do a very similar thing for scaling in. So when it's less than or equal to, I'm going to do that 50%. And I want to decrease the count by 1. So that was the condition we talked about. Not my recommendation, and many reasons to say there's only one scaling out. I would also have one by percentage. If you go watch that recording, I'm not going to repeat that. But here's the scaling condition. Microsoft recommends one scale out and one scale in. My recommendation would be to add a scaling out and a scaling in rule based around not just count, but percentages. You can set the minimums, the maximums, and the duration. So that's the process of creating a scaling rule. I've got multiple rules, and as all rule processing, I will take the greatest amount. So this rule gets processed to determine what numbers you should have. This rule number will be processed to figure out what the number is, and the greater of the two of them is the one that wins this process. Now, just looking at the characteristics for day of the week, we can pick specific days that this rule will be applied to, and then looking at specific days of the year, I can come into a calendar and looking for, say, that Black Friday that I was talking about, which is the 4th week, I think it is in November, starting off the day before, and I'm going to go through to the following Monday. So you can have these different rules for different conditions that you're working with to determine the auto scaling. I want to get into the apps. So remember, apps live inside the app service plan. And what I've done is I've deployed 2 apps into 2 different slots. So I've got an app and a slot. So if I come back to the app, I've got the features for the deployment slots that they're working with. This is where I'm going to get the features for where's the code coming from, all the characteristics of the environment that's going to host the application. And I'm going to come in and you'll see that there's a default domain or website. So that's AZ-104 web app in that Azure websites.net. Again, you could have a CNAME record in your DNS. I'm going to copy that one. I'm going to come in here and put it in and see what it says. This is just a placeholder piece of code that I've put in. So I've now got welcome to your web app running in your content. And this is in the production deployment slot. So that's the production deployment slot. There's things that I can do. I've got another deployment slot for staging, and it has currently no percentage of traffic coming to it. So one of the things I can do is swap the entire slot, or I can say I want maybe 10% of my traffic coming to this slot, this code that's about to go into production. I can have some users come to it and test it. So you'll hear about blue-green testing, A/B testing, canary testing, all these different testing methodologies can all be accounted for within the deployment slot strategy we're working with. I'm not going to go to that though. Now, if I go to the other application, and I'm going to do that, so I'm in the app service for the staging slot, and it has its URL, and you can see it's the same name, but it's got -staging. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to its website, and you'll see it only has a hello world. So I've got 2 different pieces of code running in 2 different slots under the same app service plan. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is going to come back to, I can go to either one. I want to swap the slots. So the code that's in this slot, I'm not going to change the tab. We're going to stay at that URL, and we're going to see that the code that is running in is he's going to swap. The code here, hello world will appear here, and this more graphically pleasing app is going to appear in this slot. So let me go there. I'm going to go to the deployment slots. I want to swap them, and I want to swap staging, which is this one that has the hello world. I want to swap that with production. So I'm going to swap them. The slots have been swapped. So I'm going to come back in. Remember, this was the production slot, and the code that was in it is here. If I got the code from what was the staging slot, it should just be hello world. So I'm going to stay at the same URL. This is the production URL. I'm just going to refresh this slide, and it now says hello world. This was the staging slot, and it had a hello world. It should now have that more graphically appealing look. So, and if I needed to, I can quickly fail them back. So that's an example of deployment slots. Let's return back to the lecture. A couple of other topics I want to cover before we close this app services up. Looking back at that architectural diagram of Azure, we see two different app service plans, each with a different type of app inside of them. They would then have complete capacity to consume all of the resources in that plan. Let's say this app service plan had 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. If this application only needed 1 core and 2 gigs of RAM, I've over-provisioned the resources for this app space. Now, what you could do is I could put another type of application in with it, but you want to be careful. I could have another type of app. Maybe it needs 1 core and it needs 6 gigs of RAM. I've consumed all the resources, but because they're sharing the same app service plan, let's say that this application took 100% of the resources, thereby starving this part of the application. The app service plan will scale, and it'll give me another one based around one and only one resource in there consuming it all, but the entire app service plan scales. I would also get another instance of red triangle here in addition to green octagon. So that's not talked about, but you've got to be really careful. And in many cases, you want the app service plan to follow the app service that's going to be in it. And there are reasons, much like there will be in containers, to what often referred to as sidecar, 2 applications that need to be deployed together. Absolutely, that can happen, but I just wanted to touch on that. So we've taken a look at the hierarchical structure and that parent-child relationship of app service plans that provide the resources and the services that are going to be made available to the app services that live inside of them. The app services provide the runtime environments and the feature sets that you're going to be able to use for your modern application development. Now, you could put monolithic applications in there, but they're really ideal for running a microservice deployment. Thanks for joining us for this session. To continue your learning, watch other videos in the course or explore more on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn.